All right, get this, today's deep dive takes us on a trip back millions of years to meet a real celebrity. We're talking about Lucy, the fossil that basically rewrote the human origin story.
And what's amazing is we're pulling all this from her Wikipedia page. Talk about a claim to fame.
Right, it's like her story's become common knowledge, but I bet there's a lot about Lucy that even seasoned history buffs haven't heard. So, before we get into the nitty-gritty of her bones and what they tell us, set the scene for us. Why was her discovery such a big deal?
Well, imagine this. It's the early 1970s, and the prevailing theory about human evolution was that we developed big brains first and then started walking upright.
Okay, so picture a super smart caveman just chilling, inventing the wheel or something, before ever even attempting to stand up.
Exactly. It seems illogical now, but that was the leading hypothesis. There were hints that bipedalism, walking on two legs, might have come earlier, especially with the discovery of the tongue child skull in the 1920s.
Right, the tongue child, wasn't that a pretty significant find in its own right?
Absolutely. The tongue child offered tantalizing clues that our ancestors might have been walking upright much earlier than previously thought. But the evidence was fragmented, literally. We're talking about a partial skull here, and it just wasn't enough to topple the dominant narrative at the time.
Enter Lucy, stage left, to shake things up. But first, we've got to travel to the Afar Triangle of Ethiopia. What made this region so important for paleoanthropologists?
The Afar Triangle is a geologist's dream. It's a place where millions of years of Earth's history are laid bare and embedded within those layers upon layers of sediment or fossils. A French geologist named Maurice Taïeb recognized its potential.
So Taïeb's our guy with the sixth sense, knowing there's something special hidden in those Ethiopian hills.
Exactly. And like any good visionary, he knew he couldn't do it alone. Taïeb assembled a team of experts, and that's where a young Donald Johanson comes in, someone who'd become a legend in the field.
Okay, so it's 1973. What happens next?
Johanson's team is meticulously surveying the Afar region, and they come across a knee joint, unassuming at first glance, but scientifically, a bombshell.
A knee joint. What makes a knee joint so special?
It all comes down to the angle. This particular knee joint, cataloged as AL 129-1, showed a distinct inward angle, technically called a valgus knee. It's this angle that allows for balance and efficient bipedal locomotion walking upright, like we do. Apes, on the other hand, have straight knees, better suited for climbing and knuckle walking.
So this angled knee joint, over 3 million years old, was clear evidence that someone back then was already walking upright.
Precisely. It sent ripples of excitement through the paleoanthropological community. This wasn't just any other fossil, it was a game changer.
It's like finding a missing puzzle piece that suddenly makes everything clearer. But it gets even better, right? The very next year, Johanson stumbles upon something even more extraordinary.
It's true. 1974, Johanson returns to the Afar Triangle, drawn back to this fossil-rich region. Picture this. He's walking through a gully that had already been searched a couple of times, not expecting to find much.
Okay, so he's walking through this gully, probably hot, tired, dusty. What happens next?
And then there's just a small fragment of an arm bone just lying there on the ground, almost like he was begging to be discovered.
You've got to wonder how many times somebody walked over that very spot, completely unaware of the treasure hidden right there beneath their feet.
It boggles the mind, doesn't it? But this time, this bone fragment, it caught Johanson's eye. And that discovery, it was like a catalyst. Soon, they were finding more bone fragments, parts of a skull, a femur, vertebrae. Over 3 weeks, they unearthed hundreds of bone fragments.
Hundreds of fragments. It must have been like piecing together a giant, incredibly ancient, three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. How did they even begin to make sense of it all?
That's where it gets even more astounding. Out of all those fragments, there were no duplicates. They realized they had stumbled upon something truly remarkable. 40% of a single hominin skeleton.
That's almost unheard of in paleoanthropology, right? Finding a skeleton that complete, that old, it's like winning the lottery.
It was a monumental discovery. And speaking of monumental, legend has it that the team was back at camp celebrating their find with a little music. The Beatles, to be precise.
The Beatles. Okay, now I'm really intrigued. What do John, Paul, George, and Ringo have to do with a 3-million-year-old skeleton?
As the story goes, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was playing when someone, maybe in a flash of inspiration, suggested, hey, why don't we call her Lucy? And the name stuck.
It's perfect. There's something so wonderfully poetic about it. But poetic significance aside, Lucy's discovery was major for science. So let's get into it. What did her skeleton actually tell us about our early ancestors?
Lucy, officially classified as Australopithecus afarensis, completely upended our understanding of human evolution. For starters, she was small, only about 3'7" tall and weighing around 64 pounds. That's about the size of a modern chimpanzee.
Not exactly the towering figure of evolution we might imagine.
It's true. Her small stature was a key piece of the puzzle because despite her size, her pelvis and leg bones clearly showed that she walked upright.
Wait, so this small primate, who probably spent time in trees, was already walking around on two legs?
Exactly. And we're not just talking about a hunch based on a bone or two. Lucy's entire skeletal structure, from her pelvis to her spine to her feet, points towards bipedalism. For example, remember that angled knee joint, the valgus knee we talked about earlier? Well, Lucy had it too. This inward angle of the femur allows for our knees to be closer together, which is essential for balance and efficient walking.
So she had the knees of a biped. What about her feet? Were they more human-like or ape-like?
That's where things get interesting. While her legs and pelvis scream upright walker, there's debate about her feet. Some scientists believe she may have had flat feet, which would honestly make long-distance walking on the savanna a bit tough. It's possible that arched feet, which we humans have, developed later as a way to improve efficiency and reduce stress on the body while walking and running.
Okay, so picture early humans strutting their stuff with flat feet. Makes you appreciate a good arch support, doesn't it? But let's talk about Lucy's pelvis. It sounds like that was a key piece of anatomical evidence.
The pelvis is crucial for understanding locomotion, and Lucy's is particularly fascinating. Interestingly, the initial reconstructions of her pelvis were actually incorrect.
Wait, really? How do you misinterpret a pelvis?
It all comes down to the angle and connection of the hip bones. They were initially fit together in a way that didn't align properly. It wasn't until later that scientists realized the mistake and reconstructed her pelvis with a wider iliac flare, which is that bony prominence you can feel on the sides of your hips.
So they basically gave Lucy a hip adjustment, and it changed everything.
It did. The revised reconstruction showed that Lucy had a much broader pelvis than apes, more similar to ours, which would have given her more stability when walking upright. But here's the thing. Her acetabulum, the socket where the femur connects to the pelvis, was still relatively small and primitive, more similar to an ape's.
So she was a bit of an evolutionary mosaic, a blend of ape-like and human-like traits. What does that tell us about her lifestyle?
It suggests she was transitioning between two worlds. Lucy likely spent time in trees, perhaps for food or safety, but she was also comfortable walking on two legs. It really challenges us to picture this pivotal stage in our evolution where bipedalism was emerging, but it hadn't fully taken over.
We've covered her legs, her pelvis, but what about her spine? It's like the backbone of the whole skeleton. What secrets did it hold?
Lucy's spine had its own share of revelations and controversies. Initially, scientists were convinced she had 5 fused vertebrae in her sacrum, which is that triangular bone at the base of the spine. However, more recent research suggests she may have only had 4.
Okay, so one less vertebra than they originally thought. Why is that such a big deal?
The number of fused vertebrae in the sacrum can actually reveal a lot about posture and locomotion. This new finding about Lucy having potentially only 4 fused vertebrae lends credence to the long-back model of hominoid vertebral evolution. Essentially, this model suggests our early ancestors, like Lucy, may have had a longer lower back than modern humans, which would have affected their gait and posture.
A longer lower back. It makes you picture her walking a bit differently than we might expect. It's amazing how such a seemingly small detail can spark such debate and reshape our understanding. But what about the rest of her spine? Was it similar to ours?
Unfortunately, Lucy's spinal column wasn't complete. Some vertebrae were missing. But even with those gaps, scientists were able to glean some valuable insights. For instance, they noted that her upper thoracic neutral arch, which is in the upper back, showed significant wear and tear.
Wear and tear, like an old pair of shoes. What could cause that kind of damage in a spine?
That's the million-dollar question. Researchers are still trying to understand what those worn vertebrae might tell us about Lucy's lifestyle. Was it due to her posture, the way she moved, or perhaps some other unknown factor? It's a fascinating puzzle.
It makes you realize how much detective work goes into paleoanthropology. Every bone fragment is a clue, a whisper from the past. Okay, we've talked legs, pelvis, spine. What about that brain of hers? Was Lucy already on her way to developing those complex human thoughts?
Well, our brain was still quite small, more akin to an ape's than a modern human's. But her skull did hold some intriguing surprises, particularly in her teeth.
Okay, I'm all ears. What can teeth tell us about brain power?
Lucy's canines were more spatulate than other apes, meaning they were flatter and more human-like. This suggests a shift in diet, perhaps away from tougher, more fibrous foods towards softer fare.
So her teeth were evolving, but was her brain size following suit?
Not quite at the same pace. You see, Australopithecus afarensis, including Lucy, had this distinctive cone-shaped rib cage, similar to what you see in gorillas today. This shape accommodates a larger gut, crucial for digesting a plant-heavy diet.
Okay, I'm starting to see the connection. Big gut, small brain. It's a trade-off, right?
Precisely. Digesting large amounts of plant matter requires a lot of energy, leaving less available for a larger, more complex brain.
So what we eat really does shape who we are, even on an evolutionary timescale. But wasn't there something about a specific gene that plays a role in this whole brain versus brawn scenario?
You're thinking of the MYH16 gene. This gene is responsible for producing a protein that affects jaw muscle strength. Research suggests that our lineage actually lost this gene a few million years ago, leading to weaker jaw muscles.
Wait, so losing a gene actually helped us evolve. How does that work?
It's counterintuitive, isn't it? But with weaker jaw muscles, the skull didn't need to be as robust, allowing for greater brain case expansion. It's a perfect example of how evolution works in unexpected ways. Sometimes, losing something can actually be beneficial in the long run.
It really makes you think about, the trade-offs evolution makes. A bigger brain might be great for, inventing things, but a strong jaw, that comes in handy when you're chomping on tough plants all day. Speaking of chomping on plants, I'm curious about Lucy's lifestyle. What can her skeleton tell us about how she lived and maybe even how she died?
Well, based on her teeth and bones, scientists think Lucy was a young adult when she died, but the exact cause of her death, that's still a mystery. There's no obvious evidence that she was killed by a predator, although there is that interesting tooth mark on her pelvis.
Oh, right, the tooth mark. It sounds like something out of a detective novel. What do scientists make of it?
It's a bit of a head-scratcher. The mark, it could have happened before or after her death, which makes it tricky to tell if it was a factor in her demise. One theory about Lucy's death, it's a pretty dramatic one, is that she fell from a tree.
Wait, from a tree? But we've been talking about how she walked upright.
I know, it seems contradictory, right? But remember, even with her adaptations for walking on two legs, Lucy might have still spent time in trees, maybe to look for food, maybe to escape predators, or even to sleep. Some researchers think those flat feet, while not great for walking long distances, could have made her a better climber than humans with arched feet.
So the theory is she was up in a tree, maybe lost her footing, or a branch broke.
It's exactly. Yeah. In 2016, a team of researchers published this study where they analyzed the fractures in Lucy's bones. They concluded that her injuries matched up with a fall from a significant height.
Wow, a fall from grace for the queen of human evolution. It's both tragic and strangely fitting, given, her arboreal origins. But even though her life ended millions of years ago, her story still fascinates us. Her remains are back in Ethiopia, but haven't people all over the world had a chance to, see Lucy?
Absolutely. While her actual fossilized bones are carefully looked after in Ethiopia, casts of her skeleton have been shown in museums all around the world. She even went on a 6-year tour of the United States, which gave millions of people the chance to come face-to-face with this icon of human evolution.
It's amazing to think that we're still learning so much from a skeleton that's millions of years old. But before we wrap things up, I think it's important to clarify something. Lucy isn't our direct ancestor, is she?
That's right. It's a common misconception. She's more like our incredibly famous distant relative. Lucy belonged to the species Australopithecus afarensis, which were thriving in East Africa millions of years ago. While they were definitely on the human lineage, they were more like a side branch, not our direct ancestors.
So if she's not our great-great-great-grandmother, why is Lucy so important? Why do her bones still, captivate our imaginations?
Because she represents this pivotal moment in human evolution. Lucy and her kin, they give us concrete evidence that walking upright, bipedalism that evolved before our brains became significantly larger. This discovery, it really challenged what people thought they knew about our origins back then.
She's a powerful reminder that the story of human evolution isn't a straight line. It's more like, a winding path with these unexpected twists and turns. And her discovery, it paved the way for even more exciting finds, like Artie, right?
Absolutely. In 1992, researchers uncovered a remarkably complete skeleton of Ardipithecus rhamidus, better known as Artie. Dating back an incredible 4.4 million years, Artie pushed back the timeline for bipedalism even further, which just adds to the mystery and wonder surrounding our earliest ancestors.
It's like every new discovery opens up a whole new chapter in this epic story of human evolution. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, from those first groundbreaking discoveries in that hot, dusty Afar triangle to the ongoing debates about, Lucy's life, her death, and what her skeleton can tell us about ourselves. It really has been fascinating, and I hope our listeners have enjoyed this deep dive into Lucy's world.